Dr. Tyson Meadows is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science, an affiliate associate professor in the Department of Africana Studies, an affiliate faculty member in the UMBC School of Public Policy, and most recently, an associate dean in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. He conducts research in the area of African American leadership, voting rights, political attitudes and behavior, and American institutions. His work includes Devolution and Black State Legislators and When the Letter Betrays the Spirit, Voting Rights Enforcement and African American Participation from Lyndon Johnson to Barack Obama. Dr. Meadows' research has benefited from a number of prestigious fellowships and research grants, including a 2012-2013 American Political Science Association Congressional Fellowship, where he worked as a full-time staffer for the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary. Dr. Meadows is also a former president of the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. He has spent more than 2 decades working with local, national, and international organizations on projects related to civic engagement and good governance. Dr. Meadows' talk today is entitled, Why the Color of Your Canary Matters for Democracy. Dr. Tyson Meadows.
Good afternoon. These events for the 50th anniversary are great, aren't they? You're having a good time? There are 2 major themes that run through the weekend that are relevant to what I want to talk to you about today. The first is community. How do we build community? How do we sustain community? And how do we recognize our common interests? The second is context. By celebrating what happened 50 years ago today, we learn more about our own democracy. By putting yesteryear and today in conversation, we learn about our common interests and our unique interests. My research addresses how people understand their common interests. Specifically, I'm interested in political coalitions and how they form, and what the formation of those coalitions mean for democracy. You know, some days some people say that right now we're interested in destroying coalitions instead of building them, but that's another subject. Democracy needs coalitions to survive. The key question in forming coalitions is, how do we get people to recognize their common interests? How do we get people to build community? In 2002, Democratic theorists Lonnie Grenier and Gerald Torres wrote a book called The Miner's Canary, which is essentially about community. In that book, they say race is like the miner's canary. See, the miner took a canary down because the canary's fragile respiratory system would collapse long before a human's respiratory system. So the canary in distress would tell the miner that there was toxic fumes and it was too poisonous to continue. So what Lonnie Grenier and Torres say is that racialized minorities are just like the miner's canary. Their distress tells non-minorities that there's something toxic about the environment. So in this regard, the miner's canary is a diagnostic tool and a prescriptive source. Well, while this is a very attractive theory, I think it loses something about how race works. It also loses an understanding about how information acquisition and information processing actually works. And so if you think about it, this relationship of trust actually needs 2 things. One, the miner has to trust the canary's signal. The miner's canary has to be able to signal to the miner something's dangerous. And 2, the miner has to trust the intentions of the canary. My contention is that race interprets, in particular ways, signals. In other words, the ways in which race work help to frame signals in particular ways. And the damage to that is that race does something difficult to this relationship of trust. And so when that happens, not only is the signal distorted, but the diagnosis and the prescription is undermined. And I base this based on 2 ways politics of race work. One, people hear and see race and think differently based upon what they think they hear. And two, race often acts as a proxy for and shaper of partisan identity. Black equals Democrat, white equals Republican. So imagine if the miner is listening for the signal. Imagine if the canary is otherwise thought of as suspect or foreign or inauthentic. So the miner listens for the signal, and the miner says, hey, I'm anti-bird. I'm so pro-human, I'm anti-everything else. Or the miner says, I'm anti-canary. It's not that you're a bird, it's the type of bird that really matters. Or the miner's a colorist and says, I'm anti-yellow. Or the miner could say all three. I'm disinclined to believe any bird on this particular subject, but especially a yellow canary. So imagine the difficulty the canary has in convincing the miner to accept the diagnosis and the prescription. Well, let's think about how this works in real life. In a 1992 experiment, what they did is showed black and white respondents this statement. Now, this statement is unambiguously about race and about government and about intentions. And so what they did is they varied who they attributed the statement to. In this case, the black canary is Jesse Jackson, Clarence Thomas. And what you see is that the black miners, are more likely to listen to the black canary. They also did this with a white canary. In this case, it would be Ted Kennedy and the 41st President George Bush. What you see that white canaries and white miners, that dyad is much more persuasive. You say, hey, people hear race, they hear intention. They also did this in 2003. A group of scholars simply called individuals on the phone and asked them political knowledge questions, basic questions like I teach in Poly 100. How many Supreme Court judges are there, right? So individuals who thought that they heard a black canary, you didn't see any differences, okay? They heard the canary, they didn't see any differences. They heard race, but they answered the question. But when a white canary, when they perceived that the person on the phone was white, black respondents had a different understanding of what the intention was. And so their scores went down. These authors used the theory of stereotype threat to say these blacks who were on the phone with the white canary felt pressured. They believed that they were being judged or evaluated, so they answered incorrectly. They did this because they didn't want to conform to white expectations about black intelligence. So they answered less correctly. And it's statistically significant. The authors say the problem is they heard race and heard intention. Now, there's a ton of research that has confirmed stereotype threat and implicit bias and its impact in decision making. So what my research assistants and I have done over the years is we've done a variety of experiments, both textual experiments where we don't show anybody and visual experiments that I'm going to talk about. The first experiment is when we were thinking about voting rights. So all we did is we put together an experiment where Republicans and Democrats were signaling as canaries that there was something toxic in the environment, and we call that toxic thing registration fraud or voter fraud. And what you see here is that if a Democrat heard a Republican canary, they were less likely to say the DOJ needs to do something about it. So Democratic canaries were much more persuasive than Republican canaries. We even controlled for attitudes towards voter ID laws. And here you see once again that Republican canaries are less likely to be persuasive. So you see a toxic environment, there's registration fraud, and Republicans are not listened to as much. We did another experiment, another text experiment, where we simply said, okay, you've got candidates who are talking about racial and income inequality. Who's going to talk? So we had a text experiment where you tell them the candidate's black, or you don't tell the candidates anything, or the candidate's a woman, or the candidate is white. And what you see here is that black canaries are punished. They are told not to talk about racial inequality and not to talk about income inequality. But white canaries are encouraged to squawk about inequality. White canaries are said, hey, talk, 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 talk. Black canaries, not so much. We did another experiment. This is where we design fictitious commercials featuring fictitious candidates talking about race, talking about gender, talking about income, different types of inequality. All we varied was the race and the party of the candidate. Now, the biographies were exactly the same, exactly the same. Here in this experiment, it's a Democratic candidate talking about racial inequality, and the visuals are there to prime individuals about race. We also measured racial resentment, and we also measured attitudes towards government inequality. So they're hearing and seeing race. Now, here are our findings just for the racial inequality stimulus. Now, we're in Baltimore. So if you think of the dots sort of like swimmers, right? What you see is racial inequality if an individual candidate is black or white. What you see here on this slide is that when you're swimming further, that means that you're more likely to support. And these are Democratic candidates, and these are Democrats. So we took the Republican respondents out. And what you see here is that the white candidate is swimming faster than the black candidate. And black attitudes or anti-black attitudes also matter. And what you see here is that simply the black candidate is being punished for discussions of racial inequality. We also have results for other types of inequality. But we don't blame race. We don't blame race. What we blame is selective attention, what we actually focus on as a group of human beings. Selective exposure, the kind of news sources that we think about, and segregation, the intentional, political, socioeconomic, and spatial separation of people who don't look like us, canaries who don't look like us. So in this case, even though the canary is sending a signal, the miner says, wait, did I select a yellow canary? Did I select this yellow canary? And in the end, it really doesn't matter because in the end, there are always signals about our peril. And if we don't pay attention to them, at the end, we're all going to be worse off. And so I leave you with this. What color is your canary? Thank you.
Wasn't that awesome? So I invite you all, first of all, thank you, or help me thank all